Good evening. I assume most of you know on the corners, number 14, we're looking at I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We have visitors online from near and far, and those of you who are long-term, this is actually tea. I had people at my former congregation say, now, what is that? And I said, well, I'm an undercover alcoholic, so I put a bag of tea in it so I can drink it during church services.
Your wife said, please do not say that. That's selected here.
And for those of you who are with us online, we have a pretty rowdy group. And if you face a group like this, you'd need a good strong drink every once in a while anyway, just to cope with it. Seriously though, we're glad you're here. And we're just going to cover some things on Isaac. And I've used the term trilogy. The number of times that, and I just kind of get the chills when I think about this. Isn't it amazing that he who is infinite and almighty, no beginning and no end, is willing to let himself be known by three mortals whose lives began and end as human beings. And so when I hear, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, burning bush. And we'll see this even with Jesus before we close. And just kind of let that sink in for a second, that the infinite almighty then chooses to make himself known and to identify himself, you know, and he could say, and again, all those terms, El Shaddai, the God who's strong, the God above the mountain, the term Yahweh, I am who I am. But God chooses to make himself known to other human beings by the faith of three godly men. And that says two things. That says a lot about them, but it also, rather than talking about the infinite and the almighty, then he says, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Lord willing, on Saturday, I'm a part of a memorial service, a funeral. And this dear lady was 104. And the last week of her life, and I don't know if I'll check with Clay. Clay Bryant is one of the relatives who's the youth minister at Weatherford. But daughters, relatives, or whatever came to see her. She's obviously close to death and whatever. And they're sitting there and she says, you know, I think I can quote 50 verses today. So she just starts and she rips off nearly 50 verses from memory on her deathbed. Can you imagine what kind of impression that has left with those girls? Sheila's grandmother lived to be 105, and Richard and Glenda, brother and sister, got to visit her for the last month. And for them, she quoted the 23rd Psalm and gave them exhortations about living holy and righteous and godly lives in this present age. Not implying that they're pagans, but just to say, this is what God is calling us to do. earlier that year, I had done a funeral for a 6-week-old little girl. They put her down late, it was 11, whatever. And when they checked on her at 6 o'clock this morning, she had died in her bed through the night. And just stop and think, and I got to visit with Stafford North about this. What a contrast within a month or 6 weeks. You do one service for a 6-week-old little girl, and then you do another service for a 105-year-old godly saint. And I'm not trying to be silly. At some point, they had to put many other relatives. If you dare, that would have taken up the whole brochure to do all of the whole group. But you stop and think, with each of us being terminal, with each of us being pilgrims and sojourners, then God chooses to make himself known by 3 men that all had feet of clay. We're going to progress from she's my sister to 10 of them that are just as sneaky as heel grabber Jacob is. And yet God chooses to be known by these 3 men. Last thing, and we'll jump in. How many hats has a 104-year-old woman worn during her lifetime? And you try to go back and think, what's going on the decade she's a small girl? Where are they living during World War I, during the Depression, other stuff in terms of the family and those types of things? And those of us that have had the joy of having children in school, we no longer have a real name. We are Luke and Heather's mom and dad. Most people don't know exactly who you are other than you're so-and-so's mom and dad, and now we're so-and-so's grandparents. And what a delight. But look at the different hats that a person wears during a lifetime. And when we look at the middle of these 3 men, in some ways he is the most reserved. He's the least, I don't know if the word ambitious is the right word or not. He doesn't have near the shadow and the striking faith and events of either his father or the son, and yet he's faithful. And in his own way, he's going to serve the purpose of God in his generation. So here's our central idea, CI. Isaac is the second of the patriarchal trilogy that God came to be known by. And that's just something that just kind of tried to let that sink in. Here's the infinite and the almighty saying, this is who I am. I want us to briefly outline the events in Isaac's adult life. And even for the time we have, we won't be able to cover all of it. But here's 2 things just to remember. Every time you have El in a Hebrew name or city, it's something about God. Israel, he who wrestles with God. Daniel, he who is strong. So Abraham and Sarah named the mistake God hears. How ironic is that? And as I've told you, if you've been in the class earlier, Everett Hufford in a leadership class, he said, every time we as a church and individuals start helping God, a bunch of little Ishmaels start running around. And that has just really, really sunk in. And so we're going to, I don't mean to be derogatory to the young man, but we name the mistake God hears, and then God names the son of promise, he laughs. And I have tried to imagine the laughter in a tent of a 90-year-old woman and a 100-year-old man who have a newborn in the tent for the first time in this capacity. And there would just be times of just absolute delight with his physical presence. So we're going to read text. We're going to start with Genesis 24. Some of these we'll cover very quickly and then make a few comments, but we'll walk through two basic chapters about Isaac. Let me just mention this. We spent a little block, on this term hesed or kesed. It'll either be in English either H-E-S-E-D or C-H-E-S-E-D. And to me, it's the single most significant word in the Old Testament. And we mentioned, like I think the Revised Standard uses 15 different English words to translate it, used over 200 times. God's faithfulness, God's loyalty. We sing the song, The Steadfast Love. Anytime you hear steadfast love, then that's one translation of it. And one translation uses 37 different words for hesed. So it's this, the love of covenant, the love of loyalty. Now, and again, I'm not trying to be silly or sarcastic. If you send off a servant with all kinds of gold and jewelry and camels, you have to send off somebody who's trustworthy or he'll never come back. Everybody understand what I'm trying to say by that? When you look at what he takes to give to her, you just stop and think. You have to have somebody really trustworthy to give him this much stuff and then send him completely out of the country. And there would be some people that you and I know that you'd never see again. They're gone. And so here is this trusted servant. And as he is on this trip, he prays that God's kesed, God's steadfast love that's shown to Abraham, will help him on this journey. And ladies, I'm going to ask you in a second, if you helped water the guy's camel one day and he gave you all this gold, would you get on the camels and go to a place you've never seen before the next day? I mean, there's some pretty amazing things that happen as this servant goes to find a wife for his master's son. 24:36. Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old, and to him he has given all this. My master made me swear, you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I dwell, but you shall go to my father's house and to my clan and take a wife for my son. I said to my master, perhaps the woman will not follow me, but he said, and isn't this amazing? The Lord before whom I have walked will send his angel with you and prosper your way, and you shall take a wife for my son from my clan and from my father's house. This idea of walking with God is just such an important term for the patriarchs. And then you will be free from my oath when you come to my clan. If they will not give her to you, you will be free from my oath. We don't do this, but this is culturally appropriate for these people. I put the ring on her nose, the bracelets on her arms. I bowed my head and I worshiped the Lord God. Blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham. This is after she's watered the camels and he's identified himself. And then as he worshiped and blessed the Lord who had led me to the right way, to the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son, if you are going to show, and there it is, steadfast love and faithfulness to my master, tell me. If not, I'll turn to the right or left. So they called Rebekah and they said to her, will you go with this man? This is verse 58. And she says, I will go. I'm always amazed when I read this. You know, this guy just comes across the horizon with a group of camels. You help water them. He explains who they are, you know, where we come from, all this stuff. And we're not going to do the 10-day celebration. We're going to leave tomorrow. Girls, how many of you would get on a camel with a guy that you met watering yesterday and leave and, as far as you know, never see your family again? I mean, this is just absolutely an amazing event that takes place. They sent away Rebekah, their sister, her nurse, Abraham's servant. They blessed her. And these are blessings that sprinkle through the Old Testament. Our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s. May your offspring possess the gate of those who hate you. Then Rebekah and her young women arose, rode on the camels, and followed the man. And the servant took Rebekah and went on his way. 24:62. Isaac had returned, and in Beer-Lahai-Roi, it's still not right, but close. And he was dwelling in the Negeb. And I always find this interesting. Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. We just find out little things about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as we read through. And here he has gone out to meditate with God. He lifted up his eyes, and there were camels coming. Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and she saw Isaac. She dismounted from the camel and said, "Who's that man walking in the field to meet us?" And he said, "It's my master." So she took her veil, covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, took Rebekah, and she became his wife. He loved her, and so Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. The Lord before whom I have walked will send his angel before you. So on the bottom, Abraham's servant prayed that God will show him steadfast love on this journey and faithfulness. And as I mentioned, I'm still amazed. You've just met this guy. You've watered his camels. You find out who he is. Some of us had the experience of meeting relatives we've never met before, and that can be a mixed bag. Yes, that can be, you don't know quite to know what's going to happen until you kind of get there. And the idea that through this providence and through God sending him and the prayer of the servant, that she is committed to doing this on such a short notice, to me is firstly as amazing as God calling Abraham to leave Ur and to go to a land I'll show you. Blessings are very important in the Old Testament times. So the family's going to bless her, but I said, if you ask Isaac how important is the blessing, and God's timing of the statement, thousands of 10,000s, it's going to be 40 years before they have the twins. And the final fulfillment will be the youngest of a set of twins. So again, we see something about the spirituality of Isaac. He's gone out to meditate. And I just said, unlike his son, heel grabber, and most of his grandsons who were scheming and plotting things, here he's out spending time with God. Rebekah is personally fulfilled an earlier statement made by the Lord. It is not good that man shall be alone. And so in many ways, Rebekah filled God's plan from the Garden of Eden. I will make a helper fit for him. And the girls who are the wives of the trilogy are as important to the biblical story as the men themselves. And she becomes a part of that narrative. Genesis 25:7, we get just a snapshot. The years of Abraham's life was 175. He breathed his last, died of old age, an old man. And I love this expression, he was gathered to his people. And you'll hear Moses saying that over and over and again. And we're going to, Lord willing, close with this tonight. Death is not a state of isolated lostness. If you've been in Sunday classes, I've mentioned this. When we used to have Thanksgiving, when I lived at home, with the extended family, we would have between 90 to 110 people come for Thanksgiving. And you think, that's just a real occasion to have that many people come. And there was just this sense of community and family and belonging that was a part of that. At school, my aunt was the school secretary, and there were 10 either brothers and sisters or cousins. So if you messed up, you started stating your case when you walked in the door. Because if you have 10 relatives and your aunt is the school secretary, you want to be sure and get your version out first before all the others get home about what happened that day at school. All of those things are part of community. Well, when we die, we are not left in isolation. They are gathered to their people. And long before we start getting stories about the in-between, the parables and the other stuff, we keep hearing this amazing expression through the Old Testament. These godly people die. They're not left in isolation. When they die, they are gathered to their people. How interesting. 25:9, Isaac and Ishmael bury him in the cave of Machpelah, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife. And after the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac his son. And how interesting that these two rival brothers are going to meet to bury their father, but the text just simply says, but God blessed Isaac after that. We're in 25:19. These are the generations of Isaac and Moses uses this term, these are the generations, 10 times through Genesis, and rusty memory, but I think this is number 8. And he'll just go through it different times and will give us descriptions of families and say this was this generation. So we have Abraham's son, Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, and gives the list of her family. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. The Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The children struggled within her, or they struggled together within her, and she said, if it is thus, why is this happening to me? And she inquired to the Lord. And what did the Lord tell her? 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. One shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. There is a reversal of the older to the younger all the way through the patriarchal narrative. And we'll see it with Joseph all the way through the coat of many colors as it comes up later. When her days to give birth were completed, there were twins in her womb. The first came out all red. His body was like a hairy cloak, so they named him Esau. Afterwards, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Brother McCord would call him heel grabber. And he was just, well, let's go ahead and read the rest of it. Heel grabber, he cheats. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. And then here comes the issue. Isaac, as the father, loved Esau because he ate his game, but Mom, Rebekah, loved Jacob. And I read this in the back of my mind, I kind of go, dun, 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 dun. Isn't it amazing how 2 siblings, 2 brothers can be from the same parents and just be just totally different in sometimes really good ways and sometimes in other ways. Those of you who know my younger brother growing up, and we got legitimate spankings. We weren't abused, but we got legitimate spankings. And in my brother's mind, if you could get a really good laugh, that was worth a spanking. It was just, there wasn't any doubt about it. And I would just kind of be going, Kent, no, Kent, no. And he never blinked. And being the youngest, that's how life rolls. And if you know him today, very little has changed. I tell people who work out at the school that we have a group project going on, and will you please contribute to helping keep my brother in line? That's just his nature, and he's been that way from when he came into the world. Well, here are 2 brothers that are as different in temperament as you can possibly be, but what is going to exasperate the situation is that mom and dad choose favorites. And one of the things we're going to notice, and just watch this, the generations from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Joseph, they pass down more than the color of hair and the color of eyes to the next generation. And as we're going to see, she's my sister, she's my sister. The next couple of generations, it's only going to intensify and get worse and worse. And when you look at a family genogram of the generations, there's some godly, wonderful, wonderful people, but there are also some traits like this that are passed down through the family. And heel grabber's family, just a heads up, 10 boys are going to watch an old man cry for 13 years and never tell him that the last time they saw him, he was alive. Could you sit there and watch your dad cry for 10 years and not peep? And so what starts as she's my sister is going to intensify through the generations as we go through. And so they're going to pass down some wonderful traits, but that side of the family tree is also going to be passed down as well. 26:1 at the bottom. There was a famine in the land. Besides the former famine that was the days of Abraham, Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech of the Philistines, and the Lord said, "Do not go down to Egypt and dwell in the land which I will tell you. Sojourn in this land," and isn't this a wonderful expression? "I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your offspring I will give all of these lands. I will establish the oath I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and I will give your offspring all of these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, commandments, statutes, and my laws." Doesn't this sound like Genesis 12, Genesis 15, Genesis 17? God makes these very specific promises to Abraham, and then here is this godly son, and each of these generational promises, God's steadfast love, is promised to him as well. Hang on. 26:6. As they settled, when the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, "She's my sister." And I read this and kind of go, dun, 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 dun. Where did he ever learn to say, "She's my sister"? And that's what I'm saying as we look at this and just think of a family genogram, what's passed on through generations, then this has a very familiar echo from earlier times. "My wife, lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah." And this is pretty amazing. At her age, she was attractive in appearance enough that Isaac's concerned about the possibility of him being killed. And says the same, well, let's say half-truth that Abraham had told, and it's repeated. Consequences took place. They were asked to kind of leave. It didn't turn out as bad as it could have. But then in 26:23, the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father." And see how God's working with what will become the statement of the trilogy. "I will be with you and bless your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake." And the same way that you could follow Abraham around Palestine or Israel by the altars that he built, then Isaac built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord. And this "they called upon the name of the Lord" is one of those threads that's going to run all the way through the Old Testament. And when Peter stands up in Acts chapter 2, he will say, "And whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord will be saved." And this isn't a statement of salvation, but that expression about God working to save people goes all the way back to the patriarchal times and runs all the way through Scripture. Absolutely amazing. So he pitched his tent, and Isaac's servant dug a well. And I want you to think about this. Digging a well and just the process of digging the hole, fortifying the sides, being able to crawl down a certain distance, pull dirt out. I mean, this is a major, and I'm going to use the term engineering feat, meaning you pretty well got to know what you're doing to do this. And the irony is that both Abraham and Isaac are going to build their household, are going to drill, build, however you want to say this, dig is the better word, several of these wells that contention will take place and they'll quietly go on and let someone else have the well. Or people living in the area will fill the well in. But you just stop and think, physically, what would be involved, guys, in going from just flat earth to digging this, have some kind of supports on the side? How are you going to keep crawling down to keep digging the dirt out? How are you going to, I mean, this is a major process that's going on. When you look at this is Isaac received similar blessings and promises God gave to Abraham. He will be both the physical and spiritual heir of the covenant God made with his, father should be there. And like his father Isaac, let's say it the other way, like his father, Isaac built an altar and called upon the name of the Lord. So here's just some comments to kind of look through some highlights. Isaac is the longest lived of the patriarchs. He is named in 21 biblical books, and there are 19 references to Isaac in the New Testament, and half of these will have something to do with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I call it the trilogy, the statement of the group. Isaac, to my mind, and I don't want to overstate this, but to my mind, Isaac wasn't as strong of a personality either as his father or his son Jacob. Doesn't mean that he's not important. He just wasn't. I don't know how to say this. It doesn't come out right. I don't know if he wasn't quite as strong, if he wasn't quite as, well, especially for Jacob, he wasn't quite as ornery. He's a very godly man. He's a very peaceful man, but he kind of lives in the shadow of his father. But he does it in a good way. So, and that's what I put. Isaac is somewhat obscured by the shadow of the faith of his father and the antics of his younger son. Maybe one of the best known moments is when his father offered him, as we looked at earlier, as a sacrifice on Mount Moriah. He's the most reserved, but he was also devout. He was a man of faith, worshiped, and God confirmed to him the covenant made to Abraham. So here are some ways in which the son is not like the father. And I love just to go through and find guys who taught this for 34 years and they start making these lists, and I keep thinking, oh, I would never have looked at that or thought about that. Here's just some highlights. The circumstances of Isaac's birth were miraculous as to engender laughter. And again, I just love the name. He laughs. And I just hear the laughter of two godly saints. Just to imagine how different their lives were when this little boy comes to live in their tent. He is also the first newborn child circumcised when God gives stipulations to Abraham. And what we find out is that God makes the promises to Abraham from 75 until he's 99. And then as he's 99, Isaac is conceived. And then God says, circumcise the men in your household. So Isaac is going to be a part of that group as the first newborn in that group. As Abraham's heir, and especially compared to Jacob's 12 sons, Isaac provides the essential generational link between Abraham and Jacob, and this advances the patriarchal promises. Number 4, Isaac is referred to by prophets, which link his life with the seed promises God made to Abraham. And the prophet Amos is going to use terms like the shrines of Isaac, the house of Isaac, to describe Israel. And in very different contexts, Isaac's name is at the center of the trilogy of these faithful patriarchs that God raised up as forefathers to the Jewish nation. But he's also morally different, and this isn't negative things, but just differences between he and the others. He was monogamous in that he stayed faithful to just Rebekah. We have all kinds of situations that happen, and we'll see this when we get to Jacob, and I just shake my head. Girls, it's hard to imagine you and your sister being married to the same man. That is not a recipe for domestic tranquility. And then each of them brings a concubine into it, and so now you've got 4 girls involved with that. And I'm sorry, I just hold my head. This is anything against you ladies, but I'm just thinking, dealing with 4 different ladies in one house, it's just hard to imagine all the different dimensions that would bring to the relationship. Isaac doesn't do that. And even with Abraham, he has children after Sarah. Isaac is the one who remained with her the whole time. He's the only patriarch who remains in the land of Canaan even during the famine. And it's amazing. Abraham's going to go the length of what's called the Fertile Crescent. He starts down at the bottom of Ur Chaldees, goes all the way up the top to Haran. They live there for a number of years. He comes down. He actually goes into Egypt. Jacob is going to go into Egypt at the end of his life. And Isaac is the only patriarch who just lives in that central area where they had called to be. Remaining in the Promised Land, he's become very wealthy. The fruits of great agricultural prosperity. He became an envy to the Philistines. And again, when we were talking about earlier, and I'd never thought about this, is what I love getting to do a class, because stuff that's always in the Bible comes to mind. Abraham has 318 fighting men. And then we just said, if each man has a wife and 1 child, you're already to 1,000 people. The next generation comes along and Isaac still has that household. We have no idea how many people are in the extended household of Isaac, and yet God blesses him and he becomes a very, very wealthy man. He stays there. 5:4, he doesn't typically employ the manipulative behavior that characterizes Jacob and Rebekah. He does get deceived, but he's not the one deceiving when you look at it. He seeks to be a peacemaker with his neighbors. They'll break agreements. Again, the ownership of water wells has been made with Abraham. A couple of negative things. There is a favoritism to Esau. And yes, this is a cultural custom, but it also is going to create a climate where his wife and his son set out to deliberately deceive him. And I'll repeat this in another way, but he also repeats his father's deception. She's my sister. So observation, and I've stated this, but notice, when you study Israel's spiritual first family, we pass on more than the color of our hair and our eyes to the next generation. And this has been really sobering to me to think, what are the things that we, as parents, grandparents, what are we passing down to the next generation? And sometimes our children and grandchildren learn more about what they see than what they hear. So, like his father, he waits for a long time for the birth of children of promise. When he was dealing with Abimelech again, he also stated Rebekah was his sister. He's a quiet, godly man as he walked before God. Unlike his father, he didn't travel the Fertile Crescent. He never traveled far from his birthplace. He had only 1 wife, and she gave birth to a set of twins. He was not an aggressive, assertive man and was never involved in a major conflict. And he gracefully surrendered water wells that belonged to him and even to his father rather than engage in open conflict. I think all those things are commendable. What did our Lord say? Blessed are the peacemakers. And especially compared to his son, he is going to be a peacemaker in situations where he has the opportunity to extend and to do that. He lost his sight in his later years. His blindness was the opportunity for Jacob to steal his older brother's blessing. And so we'll move to Jacob and we'll look at this. I don't know how to say this. This isn't going to come out very good. But Lady's mom came up with the idea. He agreed to it. He's fully a part of it. But how hairy did Esau have to be to say, we're going to put animal skins on our arms, and when a blind man feels of this, then he'll think this is Esau. I mean, he's kind of the outdoorsman. I just see this strong hunter hunk of a man, and the idea that you put animal skins on to fool a blind man that this is your brother tells you a lot about just Esau. And I say this complimentary. Outdoorsmen have a scent about them that people who live in tents don't have.
Tents?
Yeah, but I mean, if you're cleaning animals,
Okay.
you know what I'm saying? If you're gutting and skinning and cleaning and doing all that kind of stuff with your hands, you can wash as many times as you want to, but part of that stays with you just because that's just a part of that part of life. We don't see Jacob doing that type of thing. And this is amazing. As people start losing their sight, olfactory senses become even stronger. And so we're going to deceive our father by putting animal skins on us. So Esau must have just been this hunk of an outdoorsman type thing to be deceived like that. In his later years, he suffered 20 years of exile of Jacob. Imagine your son's gone for 20 years and you don't see him at all. The death of Rebekah, the departure of Esau. He is an intensely religious, domestic, and peaceful man. Abraham, 175, Isaac, 180. So these are things about the trilogy. And I just feel like sometimes you kind of look at a person and then it's nice just to kind of step back and say, well, within the biblical narrative, what are some examples of where they were talked about or mentioned? Joseph requests, take my body out of this place. And the first time that this is used, take this to the land he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So as Joseph gives instructions about taking his body out of Egypt, then here's the first time they were introduced to referring to God, and then the three patriarchs are used with that. We've covered this earlier, but this is still amazing, and I just want to repeat this. God had promised Abraham that his descendants would be sojourners or servants for 4 generations. And I can remember Harold Redd was the first person that pointed this out, and I just thought, okay, this is going to be nearly 500 years before it happens. The Lord said to Abram, know for sure that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that's not theirs, and they will be servants there. They will be afflicted for 400 years, but I will bring judgment on that nation they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. Isn't that the beginning of the book of Exodus? And so God tells Abraham, roughly 500 years before it happens, yes, you're going to have a son, and it's eventually going to become a nation, but they are going to be exiles and strangers and sojourners, afflicted. And I think they're in Egypt for 430 years, and God brings them out. But notice, 500 years later, and this is Exodus 2, during those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning. And notice, God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And just let that sink in. 500 years later, God had told Abraham, this is what's going to happen. And God understands, God remembers the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God saw the people and God knew. This isn't just because of funerals, but to me, being involved in that, and like I said, even on Saturday, having a small part with one, this wonderful expression, they are gathered to their people, is something that just, it haunts me in a good way, meaning we're getting these hints long before we come to the resurrection of Jesus and other things, that when God's people die, they're not left in isolation. Can I use a colloquial term, and I don't like to be too casual, but it's kind of like that speaks about a spiritual family reunion. You understand what I'm trying to say by that? If someone is gathered to their people, then they're not this lost blob identity. They're gathered to people that they know and love. And on Saturday, something, whether I say it or not, it will cross my mind. How many people has a godly woman who's fed and served and helped the church for decades, how many people does she know that are going to be on the other side? And the sense that we're gathered to our people. Jesus is going to refer to the trilogy of faith. God is not just a historical figure. He's the God of those who lived 2,000 years before him. And here's his statement. As for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said by God? I am, not I was. Everybody hear what just was said? 2,000 years later, present tense, God says, I am the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living.
When Jacob came back and Esau met them, and, they ended up being friendly. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, when Jacob ran off, he got all of Isaac's stuff.